Hello, my name is Lonnie Mimms, and I'd like to welcome everyone, especially the group in Naples, to the Apple Pop-Up Museum. What we've done is create a temporary exhibit in an old CompUSA office space. And this used to be the corporate regional headquarters for CompUSA, so there's a little bit of irony having it in a company that is no longer around, which is kind of more typical of the computer industry, Apple being the stellar exception to that. So if you'd like to follow me, we've taken the office and divided it up into a natural timeline using the existing offices that were here. So we haven't changed any of the wall or any of the office layouts. Each room, okay, in here we chronicle a little bit of what happened to the two Steves prior to joining together and forming the Apple Computer Company. We have copies of each of their senior yearbooks, although they weren't at the high school. They went to the same high school, but they were not there at the same time. Woz is 4 years older, so he had graduated before Jobs became a freshman in school. They both had a lot in common. They were both in the electronics club. They both were very fond of practical jokes, and one of the first things that they actually did together was to figure out that you could hack the phone system. And I think Woz had read about it from somewhere, and they invited the original phone hacker, who was a guy named John Draper, to come meet with them. And they knew it was illegal, so whenever Woz created his what was called the blue box, they didn't typically put a lot of numbers or tone that would break into the AT&T phone system. So they would phone a certain toll-free number. They would push the button, creating the 2600 hertz tone, which had been discovered because it was the same tone that Captain Crunch whistles had emitted, which was kind of just a funny coincidence. And once they called that number and pushed the button to make the tone, then the AT&T system would think that they've hung up, even though the line would still be active. So at that point, they could dial a long-distance number, and it would be essentially free to them. So one of the jokes that Woz played was that he called the Vatican and he asked for the Pope, and he pretended to be Henry Kissinger, and he didn't realize the time difference, so whoever answered the phone at the Vatican told him that, I'm sorry, Mr. Kissinger, but it's 3 in the morning here. Is this extremely important? Do you want me to wake the Pope? And he says, no. And they hung up, and we're just, rolling on the floor laughing. If you continue around in the room, we have a picture of Jobs, and actually these are not the right time period. This is from 1984. It was taken by Norman Seff, and we talked with him about his trip out to photograph the Apple folks, and we'll have some more pictures of him later in the appropriate time period. But we just thought this picture was absolutely captivating. And we have a copy of Steve Jobs' yearbook over here. And like I said before, he went to the same high school. And during that era in '72, he had the appropriate long hair. The person that introduced the two of them was in between them in school and had known both of them through the electronics, and his name is Bill Fernandez, and we have him pictured here. Haven't been able to find a better quality picture at this point, but he was Apple employee number 4 ultimately. So do you have any questions at this point? Okay, I understand we have no questions at this point, so we're going to continue into the second room, which is called the garage. And what we've done is recreate the garage. And this is where, whenever the two jobs met and got together, they would go to the Homebrew Computer Club, which was out in California in the Valley. And one of the things that happened there was that Woz wanted to create a computer that was affordable. At that point, the Altair and some of the other ones had come out, but those were very expensive. So what he did was he combined a TV typewriter with a very simple 6502 computer and put them all on one board. And Woz was the master at using a minimal number of chips. And he created the Apple I. And at that point, he was actually handing out the schematics. So the Apple I is essentially free to the public. That's not a product that the Apple company actually owns. You're giving this away for free. Let's go ahead and start making these boards and selling them. You know, there's a profit to be made here. There's a company here. So what they did was that Jobs sold his minibus, and we've got a little model of it over here on the wall. And Woz sold his calculator, which was an HP 65. He was willing to buy the machines, buy the computers, but only if they were put together. So they had to come up with the capital, and that's how they did it. So in here, we've recreated the garage. And from what I understand from Dan Kotke, who was here the first year that we had our Vintage Festival as one of the speakers, you know, he said it was a pretty good job of recreating the garage. We copied 4 pictures that are the only ones we're aware of from when they were actually in the garage. Also, it's the classic American technology story of you know, starting a company in the garage, but like everything, the reality is that it actually started out with them putting together these boards in the living room of Steve Jobs' parents' house, from my understanding. Then they moved into the guest bedroom, and then ultimately they ended up in the garage. So what I'm standing in front of now would have been the door at the front of the house. Where we came into the room would have been about where the door would be going into the house. And then on the adjacent wall here, where there's a window, actually was where there was a window looking out into the yard. We did a little bit of artistic license here. They didn't have that kind of topo in that area. And you know, then in the center here, were you able to see that as you came in? We have an Apple I, and this is what the boards look like. This is actually a copy, although we do have a real Apple I in the collection. Due to safety concerns, we keep a very accurate copy here, and this one was actually signed by Woz. And not to get into too much detail, but basically the top half of the board is a TV typewriter, which was something that Don Lancaster had designed earlier, and the bottom half, where you can see the white processor chip, is the computer portion with the memory on the right-hand side. And this particular one would have had 8K. Each of those rows of purple memory chips on the right-hand side is 4K. And we're playing music that is appropriate to that time period. That was some of Steve Jobs' favorite albums. So we had Bob Dylan, and that was probably his favorite group or favorite performer. And you know, we just have that various songs on a rotation here. Here's some pictures of them actually selling the Apple I. To the right here at the first West Coast Computer Fair. And you have Woz to the left, Jobs in the middle, and Dan Kotke on the right. And Kotke is the person that Jobs met at Reed College while he was there, and afterwards traveled around India with him. And he was one of the 4 people that was here in the garage putting the Apple I's together, along with Steve Jobs' sister. So at this point, I'll ask if there's any questions about the garage and the first product. The company was formed with a partnership agreement on April 1st of 1976. So this would be coming up on the 40th anniversary, which we're going to be highlighting and celebrating at our Vintage Festival 4.0 on April 2nd and 3rd. So are there any questions at this time?
Okay, are there any questions? Yeah, we have one coming up here.
When did you decide to start creating this museum?
I had a question on when I decided to start this museum. And the answer would be, I guess I've always been extremely passionate about computers, back to the technology Sol 20, which came out before the Apple products. And just through having a extremely large collection that's growing, it's always been my desire to try to share it with the public, and also to try to inspire some of the younger folks to get into the technology area. Are there any other questions?
Any other questions? Oh, by the way, we have somebody here who's 97 years old who is watching the accuracy of what's being said.
Finally worked at the first one.
Could I just ask,
1 second.
have you asked him?
Come on. Okay, we got another question here.
When and where was the first West Coast Computer Fair, and was there one on the East Coast in Atlantic City at some point? Because I think that's where I first saw an Apple.
Okay, the question was, when was the first West Coast Computer Fair, and was there one on the East Coast, possibly in Atlantic City? And the first West Coast Computer Fair, I think, was in 1977, but I'm not absolutely positive about that. And it may have been in 76. And as far as one on the East Coast, not sure when that would have been. We were lagging a little bit behind on this coast from having that kind of thing. So sorry I don't have a better answer on that, but that's a good question to research.
Any other questions? Okay.
Are there any more questions?
All right, go ahead.
Our next room is called Apple in Bloom, and in this room we're highlighting the Apple II, which was the first real product that Apple sold after they incorporated. And at this phase, they received a lot of their initial funding from a man named Mike Markkula. And he was also had the expertise in forming a new company and getting things started. So Woz designed the Apple II, and it incorporated a lot more features than the Apple I, had a lot more capabilities. And it had expansion slots and a lot of ability to do additional things. We're also showing in this room some clones of the Apple II, because it was a very popular machine when it came out, and it was very affordable. Folks immediately started copying it, and this led to a lot of initial litigation that created a lot of the concepts of various copyrights with things that are not as tangible as printed papers. And there's a lot of stories that go into you know, how they managed to copyright software and not have people copy the built-in ROM chips that had BASIC on it and things like that. So it created quite a bit of the interesting early history. One of the things that differentiated the Apple II from a lot of the other popular machines at the time was the disk drive. Most machines, including the Apple II, initially were using a cassette tape, which was a very slow and linear way of getting a program storage. You had to go to that point in the tape where the program started and then take the time to play it and load it in. Whereas a floppy disk drive gave you the ability to go directly to the program that you wanted or pull off the data that you wanted much quicker. What we're showing here is the Disk 2, which is what they called it. It was the disk drive for the Apple II. And this is serial number 1. This is the first one that came off of the production line, along with the original hand-wired prototype controller card that was hand-wired. So this was a game changer for Apple, and this is what really allowed them to grow at an explosive rate at this point in the company's history. It also became the machine of choice in schools. So you'd see Apple IIs in schools all over the country because it was one of the friendliest machines to use, and they had a lot of good early software that would work in the school environment. Over on the wall here, we're showing the first shipment of Apple IIs, all stacked up there, and one of the early ads for an Apple II. And you know, what's one of the things interesting about this ad is the I don't know what you call it nicely, but the gender stereotyping that has occurred in technology and still continues to this day, that we're trying to help break through by inspiring more girls to get into the technical field. But you see the guy here working on his portfolio and the stock quotes, and the wife is in the background making dinner. As we continue around, we show an original Apple II, and on the wall behind it is a schematic diagram of the Apple II with some manual changes that were made in 1977. You have BF, which we are pretty sure is Bill Fernandez, employee number 4, making changes on the Apple II. Below it, we've got one of the engineering prototypes. And on the entrance wall, we're showing samples of the first 5 versions of the Apple II with unpopulated boards that are engineering samples. At this point, I'd like to ask if there's any questions regarding the Apple II and the first real product that launched Apple into the big leagues.
Any questions?
How did Apple get its symbol and name of the company?
Okay, we want the next question. You got the first one, right? Ruth, here comes our 97-year-old friend Ruth. She's jogging to the front of the room. Hold on a minute.
Okay.
It's called the Apple II, but it had a monitor, and Steve Jobs gave it to all the high schools free.
Okay, good question. What are some of the other questions, and then I can hit one after the other.
Okay, Next question, come on up.
Yes.
George Rubin, I'm interested also in what the retail price was on that computer. Okay, here's the next question.
Who was the first company who produced in large numbers the chips?
You got that?
Okay.
Any other, okay, one more. Got another one coming.
Yeah, when they got them into all the schools across the U.S., they could not still have been making them in the garage. Where was the first factory that manufactured them in large quantities?
Any other questions? That's it for now.
All right, we have several questions that have come in, and some very good questions. I'll see if I can give some answers. You obviously are a very, very well-educated group, and the questions are fairly detailed. The first question was, how did they come up with the symbol and the name of the company? And there's a lot of stories regarding that. One is that area of the valley was originally there was quite a few orchards, and Jobs had worked in some orchards before that point, and I think that the apple was just a good basic symbol that he had a lot of contact with. And because the apple looked so much like a peach or another fruit whenever they drew it up, he liked the idea of having the bite out of it, and then the coloring came. The original logo for Apple was not the apple itself. It actually was Newton sitting underneath an apple tree with an apple in his hand in a very complex drawing that was done by the third original partner, and it was much too complicated. So whenever they went mainstream, they simplified it down and just went with the apple. So there's a lot of connections that you can make with the apple. Going back to Newton and the whole idea of this is a brand new thing, and they're going to set the world on fire. The next question was regarding whether they had monitors, and this came from our 97-year-old friend. Whenever they went into school, they did have to have monitors. The Apple II originally was made so that you would just use one of those little antenna plugs to go into your normal TV set. And you could plug it in and use it with just about anything. When you see the ad over here, you'll notice that he's just going into a normal TV set. So the monitors were created slightly after the Apple II. That was not one of the original products. Another question we had was regarding the manufacturing of the apples, and there's a lot of stories with that as well. They started out manufacturing them. I think it was pretty much in California. I don't know the factory name, or it was definitely not in the garage. And where did the chips come from? I had a group of engineers that I met with out in California, including some of the very first Apple employees. And they were telling me stories that they said, well, now the statute of limitations run out, I guess we can tell these stories. And they were saying things like, we had a chip salesman who would come, and he'd drive his old Buick, and he'd open up the trunk and he'd pull out these boxes and boxes of chips. And he said, we didn't ask whether they were even new chips. We just needed them to make these boards. And apparently at one point there was a need for the 555 chip, which is a timer integrated circuit. And according to them, they were having trouble getting those chips from the manufacturers. The supply lines were not as good as they are now. And what they did was they had a contract to get all of the 555 chips that this company could produce within a time period. And they understood later that because of the limited manufacturing ability of the companies for these chips, that they actually were disrupting Tandy Corporation because they needed the same chips. And unbeknownst to the folks at Apple, they put a slight crimp in the production of the TRS-80s at the time. So I don't know if there's truth to that, but this is coming from some of the early Apple engineers. As far as where the exact factory was located and that kind of thing, I really don't know. But by seeing, here's the first delivery of a batch of Apple IIs. At the very beginning, it still was very much a small business. I'm going to have to research when they geared up and were able to produce these by the thousands. And I don't remember if there was any other questions on that line or not. But we're going to move on to the next room, and if you do have another question that I missed, please feed it to Frank at this point, and I'll answer it as soon as I can. Okay, out in the hallway here, we are showing an early Alto machine, and this is the machine that when Steve Jobs went to the Xerox PARC research facility out in the valley, he saw this machine and was absolutely blown away by the capabilities. He didn't even remember some of the landmark things that it could do whenever he left, because he was so blown away with the use of the mouse and with the graphics that it had. But this machine also had the first case of having a print capability, and for whatever reason, Xerox just could not get this product out to market. They didn't understand what they had, etc. So even though they tried, this was never commercially sold, but they made a version for the commercial market that was called the Star, and it didn't sell real well. It was a very expensive machine, but this is what inspired Jobs to start working on the Macintosh. But before we get to that, let's go in the room here that we're calling this turbulence. And in here, we're showing the products that came after the original Apple II up until the time that Steve Jobs left the company. And Woz would have left the company in about the similar time frame. So the machine they came up with after the Apple II was the Apple II Plus, came out in the middle of 1979. And then they also came out with 3 additional versions of the Apple II Plus. They had the Euro Plus, they had the PAL Plus, and then they had the J Plus. So the Euro Plus was made for the European market. The black machine in the center here was one that they had made specifically for schools because it was harder to open up the case, and you didn't have the kids' ability to pop open the back and start messing with boards or disrupting the innards of it. And then the J Plus actually has Japanese characters on the front of the keyboard. The first printer that they came out with was the silent type printer, and this was a big deal for them because it was one of the less expensive printers at the time in 1980, and it retailed for $699. And hard to believe now that it's a thermal printer that prints on the glossy thermal paper that tends to turn purple over time. But that was a real good thing because it gave them an output device. At this point, Apple was getting a lot of pressure from the investment community and from the analysts in New York to come up with another product. At this point, their whole company had been based around the Apple II and the different versions, which were incredibly successful, but analysts wanted to see where is this going? You know, are you going to have another follow-up product, or is it just going to be the Apple II? You know, one show, one more show, and they were pushed into developing the Apple III on a very, very fast time period. And the primary designer of this was Wendell Sanders. And it was actually at his house out in California that I met with a lot of the early engineers and kind of brought them together, where we heard a lot of interesting stories. This is one of 4 prototypes of the Apple III that was made. This one was used in the software department to create the programs while they were perfecting the machine itself. What you see here is the finished product Apple III. This machine was very heavy, unlike the Apple II that is in a plastic foam type case. This one has a metal interior for the RF shielding. It was having trouble getting the sign off because it was transmitting. So to shield the signals from the board, they put it in a metal case. And a common problem they had was that the chips would get unseated from the card. So one of their this is one of the stories, is that the fix for that was so reliable when you picked up the machine and Apple III and didn't be cell and drop it all and hard surface, just unfortunately the inches that hope that it reached depths. So the primary reason for that was that they were pushed to develop it much too quickly and didn't have the time to perfect it. Below you see an Apple IIe, which is a further evolution of the Apple II line. And this was Woz's passion, was to continue refining the Apple II, which ultimately culminated on the far end here with the Apple II GS, which stood for graphics and sound. In between this, sorry to keep going back and forth, we had the development of the Lisa, which Jobs had denied was named after his daughter. He insisted that it was for local integrated software architecture, which meant nothing, and ultimately did reconcile with Lisa, and Lisa did live with him, short time later. Jobs actually came on board really being deeply involved with the Macintosh project, which is again the idea of copying it from the Alto. And here you see an original Macintosh. This machine came out to a lot of fanfare. We're actually running the 1984 Super Bowl commercial in this room, where it was advertised initially with the hammer throwing and going into the screen, and how 1984 wasn't going to be like George Orwell's 1984. The machine sold well in the first year, but then sales dropped off dramatically because there really wasn't that much software for it. It was used more in the graphics and the artist community, I think, than it was anywhere else. Here we're showing a picture, again taken by Norman Seff, of the part of the Macintosh team. And I think they were originally in a pyramid here. And then when the pyramid collapsed, Jobs came out of his office to see what was going on each side of the collapsed pyramid group. And Mr. Seff took a couple more pictures, and this is the one that we had chose. We're showing a Macintosh here running the first game program that they released for the Macintosh, and this was originally a test program, and it's called Alice. And what it is it's a chess-based program where you pick which piece Alice is going to be, and then the computer tries to take you, and you have to take all the other pieces before to win the game. So anyway, it's an early Macintosh game. And at this point, I'll take additional questions or questions that I might have missed.
Any other? Yeah, I was interested. My question was the retail price of some of the machines and the weight. Any other questions? That's the only question. 1 second.
Wasn't there an Apple IIc or an Apple C at some
Is there
point?
an Apple 2C or C? Is another question.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? That's it for now.
All right, we have a couple questions. One was on the weight of the machines and the retail pricing, and I think that most of the Apple IIs in the original case were in the $1,400 range, give or take. Really don't know what the Apple III sold for. Apple IIs are very light. A child can pick those up. It's pretty much just the foam case and the single board that's in there, and the power supply used a much more advanced power supply than most of the computers in the day. It didn't have the enormous transformer in it, so it didn't have a lot of weight. Apple III was quite a bit heavier because of the metal case. This is probably in the neighborhood of 20 pounds or so. Don't know the pricing on this. It sounds like you guys are more into, you have a lot of good questions on the production, the business side of it, and I'll do some more research and have those answers. So the next group that comes through will have that. The Lisa was roughly a $10,000 machine. This machine was very very highly priced, and very few of them sold. What you're seeing here is an original Lisa that has the 5 1/4 inch, what they call Twiggy drives. They made a Lisa which was called the Mac II as well, that had the 5 1/2 inch drives. Regarding whether there was an Apple IIc, the Apple IIc is shown here. And this was considered really one of the early portables. On the top, flips up to become a handle, and then you would carry a small monitor like this with it. So it still needed an external monitor to work. And let's see. Actually, going back to the question earlier on the Apple monitors, this is the Monitor 3. Was one of the common monitors that Apple would sell, and they had several different sizes of monitors. You saw the monitor that came with the Apple IIc. There were other ones that were this size that were monochrome. They also had ones this size that were color. We're not featuring those just because they're fairly generic looking, but we do have those in the collection. So we're going to move on to the next room. After Jobs hired Scully, who was at the time the president of Pepsi, he used the famous line, which you probably saw the quote earlier on the wall, that you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugar water or come with me and change the world. And you can imagine back in that time period, that was a very arrogant statement, which ultimately became true. So maybe if you say something enough, or you have the mindset, you have a much better chance of making it actually happen. Initially, he and Scully saw, we're going down the same path, but with the Macintosh project and the lack of a real success there, there was a divergence on the thinking, and the board sided with Scully, and they didn't actually fire Steve, but what they did do is they sent him out to an outer building that was part of the grouping of Apple buildings. And so the next room we're going into, we're calling the Wilderness, which is one of the names that Jobs used for the building that he was sent out to. It even went as far as making a pirate flag using the colored Apple logo, and flying a pirate flag from the building. We have other things in addition to just the hardware. We're also showing here some wall art that was created by Myra Berg for their catalog in 1983, and she created 27 of these, 25 for the catalog, one for Jobs and one for Watts. And not sure how well you can make it out, but you can see Myra Berg here, possibly with white material over the beige. Also have a friend of mine who is Robert Tinney, did a lot of the cover art for Byte magazine, and in 1984 he also did some interior pieces that had some Apple. These are the original artist drawings of some of the interior art that was in a 1984 version of Byte magazine, showing the Apple suburbs and Apple Uptown with the brand new Macintosh and the Lisa in the background. All right, we are now in the Wilderness. This is a room that shows what Jobs and Woz did after they left Apple. Woz went on to create a universal remote control that didn't sell extremely well with a company called CL9. Very, very creative design, but it did not keep the programming once the batteries went dead. So that was kind of one of the major flaws with it. He also went on to teach some classes, teach kids. He went back and got his degree at Berkeley. Meanwhile, Jobs went off on a rampage. He was set to create the best computer that had ever been created, and he formed a company called Next. And we have several Next versions here. We have the Next Cube. We have the Next, what we call the pizza box over here, and these machines still run and have just amazing capabilities. The graphics are very good. They are monochrome, so these particular ones, early ones, were not full color machines. And again, they sold for a starting point of about $6,000. With the Cube going up to $10,000. And it was actually a Next Cube that was used as the first World Wide Web server in CERN by Tim Berners-Lee. And so that gives it a little bit of claim to fame. Also, the software that was created for the Next ended up being what Apple bought back in '97. And it's still found, the core of it is still found in OS X today. So this was a very advanced operating system. During the same time period, Jobs also bought a company called Pixar. And this was bought from George Lucas of Star Wars fame. And I think George was going through a bad divorce at the time, and Jobs bought the company, which was mainly a hardware company, for around $5 million. And that was back in the '89 time period. And the Pixar machine it was actually a computer, was a little bigger than a Next Cube and was more of a beige cube, and it was very fast hardware that could do renderings, lifelike renderings that would be used in the movie industry. Well, they weren't selling many of them, and they had created some demos, and then they decided, did some joint marketing with Disney and decided to come up with their own movie. So the first thing they made was Toy Story. So we're just showing a lot of the toys from Pixar movies. Eventually he sold the company to Disney, and I understand when he died, he had about $4 billion worth of Disney stock and about $2 billion worth of Apple stock. So he was much more vested in Disney, being the largest shareholder than he was actually in Apple. In the hallway here, we're showing a lot of products that were created, and I'm sorry to not ask for questions at this point. We're starting to run out of time, so we'll ask for questions at the end, if that's okay. And I'm gonna go through this last part a little bit quicker. Most of these you may be familiar with, even more so. This is a machine that was designed by Johnny Ive. And at that point, he was an independent contractor, and this is the Macintosh 20th anniversary version. And they didn't sell too many of these, but it was a very, very cool machine, as you can see. In the hallway here, we're also showing a lot of products that were, all of this happened outside of the time period when Jobs was involved with Apple. This was in the Scully days and even after that. They had literally hundreds of products, everything from very large servers. I think this is the largest product that they made, very large, heavy server. The Macintosh 2, which looks very much like an IBM putty box. They had a camera. They had the Newton, which was a very early attempt at a personal assistant. They also had a joint venture to make a video game box called the Pippin, and this is the Japanese version. The American version is black. We have a Newton in a case, and this is a case that was also designed by Johnny Ive. I should say Sir Johnny Ive. He was knighted, and very, very organic looking. And these also ended up in a lot of classrooms because they were so light, portable. They still had a full keyboard and much less expensive than the traditional computers. Here's another putty box, the Macintosh Quattro, and okay, the next room we're gonna go into is the beginning of Jobs coming back into Apple. After Apple purchased Next, Jobs immediately started in on, what can we do? The company at that point was literally within months of being bankrupt, and they needed a complete spark to restart things. There was an ad campaign that was here's to the crazies and think different. And then they also came out with the new product, which was the iMac. And iMac was he spotted very quickly that Johnny Ive was a design genius and a total asset to the company. So they teamed up in the organic looking design, which we'll see in the next room of the iMac. In this room, we're highlighting the advertising and the marketing, and it's interesting that they weren't actually advertising a product. It was more of a concept and a way of thinking. And if you haven't seen or heard the Here's to the Crazy ad, I still think that it's one of the most inspirational messages to give youth today. Okay, that was the ad with Jobs doing the voiceover. In the ad that actually aired, it was Richard Dreyfuss. Also in here, we're showing the Think Different posters, and they gave out 11 by 17 posters of these people who changed the world in their own way to schools. And then they had some of the larger posters were used in the marketing campaign. Here we had to show the full-size poster of Ted Turner, since he's one of our local boys with Captain Courageous and CNN and Turner Network and so on. Here's a list of the folks that are on the posters. Yeah, if you have any questions and we don't manage to get to them, please feel free to email me at lonnie@computermuseumofamerica.com, all spelled out. We have several Jobs quotes and other folks' quotes around the walls. This quote is the reason why we're able to get a lot of the one-of-a-kind artifacts. He says, "Let's go invent tomorrow rather than worrying about what happened yesterday." And that was truly a philosophy that he lived. He did not care about having a corporate museum or having any of the artifacts of former products preserved. He was very focused on what was going to be the next thing and what was going to be new. So what that means is that the engineers that created these products and these different things typically kept their creations. They were very proud of them, and rightfully so. And through contacting with these early engineers is how we were able to get some of the prototypes and some of the very early items. This room features the iMac that I had previously mentioned. This was the product that got them back on the map. And there's the famous presentation that Jobs made where Bill Gates was on the screen behind him, larger than life in a very big format. And Jobs didn't realize till later how much of a mistake that was, that it made him look very small in comparison to Bill Gates. But truly at that time, it actually was appropriate because Bill Gates virtually bailed the company out in those very early days when it was about to go under. But the product that they came out with is the iMac, and we've got the first examples of the first two versions here. The first one that was made was called the Bondi Blue, and it has a CD tray that actually comes out and is a little bit more of a matte finish to it. The ones that came later are more glossy, and they have the slot for the CDs. And we've actually got examples. We're dominating the market. anything that came out with color was radically different, just by being colorful rather than putty colored. Was a huge differentiating factor to begin with, and then the machines themselves, were also very cool. Although the hockey puck mouse, personally, I thought was not very ergonomic, not real easy to use. We're showing one of the sunflower, what we call the sunflower Max here, that's running an approximation of how many Apple devices were sold since 1977. And this isn't an exact number, but it's based upon what we heard their sales rate was, and we just had a good starting point. So that's probably within a couple hundred million. Okay, then. Obviously, there's a lot of different Macintoshes, a lot of computers that go between that room and this room. This room is called 1,000 Songs. This is when they kind of deviated, got more into a consumer electronics product mentality, and came out with the iPod. So we've got examples of the iPod in an iPod family tree, along with commercials that first came out showing the silhouette of different performers with their iPod and the white cord. So at this point, I think we've got time again to have some questions come in live.
Okay, any questions?
Yeah, the first one actually had a wheel that would physically rotate, and was a fairly, by current standards, fairly clunky device. Although at the time it was incredibly elegant and very small. Some of the iPods that came out, like the third generation Shuffle, were really no bigger than a stick of gum, almost to the point where it was too small. I think I lost at least one of those, and it's very easy to misplace. They also had some special editions along the way. Here's the U2 edition that has signatures of the members that came loaded with a whole bunch of albums of their songs. Okay, before I answer some of the questions that were given, what you've just seen are examples of the iPhone 1, 2, and 3 on the wall, and the iPad and iPad Mini. Also some of the early Apple versions of trying to penetrate into the television market. They came out with a Macintosh TV in 1993, whenever Jobs was not there, and it didn't sell real well. They also came up with a set-top box, of which we have a prototype of, and that led eventually into the TV 1 and TV 2, 3, and 4. So here's the Mac TV, and why I say you can tell it wasn't during the Jobs era is that they had a CD tray that was white. It didn't even match the color of the rest of it. He never would have accepted something like that. Design faux pas. Here's a prototype of a set-top box that was never actually sold to the public. And then here's the original iTV, which had a disk drive in it, so you could actually store programs like the Replay TV and the TiVo units, and then the more current versions of the streamer. And they look the same, even the newer versions now. To the questions. First question was on operating hours and being open, and we are typically at this point we're only open for special events and by appointment. So if you happen to be in the Atlanta area, we'd be happy to open it up and show you through. Our next event that's open to the public is going to be April 2nd and 3rd, which is a Saturday and a Sunday, and it's going to be the Vintage Computer Festival Southeast 4.0. And our hours of operation on that are going to be from 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday. And you can see it on the website if you look at computermuseumofamerica.com and get more information. But we're going to have a lot of computers of different types, not just Apples. It'll be passionate hobbyists will be playing around and showing off their wares. And we'll also have, the museum will be fully open here with everything running. And we also have another exhibit on the history of the PC, which will also be open. So I would love it if some of you guys were up here, just let us know that you're going to be here, because I'd like to meet some of you personally. In regard to I think the next question was on the software, and it was asked about MacWorks and how everything was integrated. And back in the time period when the machines were really hobbyist machines, everybody was wondering, what do you do with these things? There wasn't what you call now, there wasn't a killer app. There wasn't some application that would drive you into buying these machines. Most of them, frankly, were being bought as game machines, and people were playing around with it, more as toys than they were as business machines. What happened in 1979 was two guys at Harvard came up with a program called VisiCalc, which was the first commercially available software, and it was written for the Apple II originally, and then eventually ported over to other machines. But that was in itself a reason why businesses would be willing to buy an Apple II. Now we have the spreadsheet program that we can model out all kinds of things. We weren't limited in what we could do, and it was easy enough to where the average person could do it and create models of different financial or business things without knowing how to program. The Works is an extension of that, essentially, and it gave even more reason. Whenever you have a word processor and you have more applications that are all tied together, was definitely a good and a big thing for Apple. The next question was in regard to how did I acquire, or how did I amass the collection here? And I'll say that what you've seen actually is just a small portion of the overall computer collection. At this point, I think we're probably pretty close to being one, if not the largest, microcomputer-related collections in the world, with probably near 250,000 different items, not just computers and things, but also manuscripts, books, the software that goes with it, paraphernalia that surrounded the industry at the time, and the stories of some of the original folks. And it really started in the mid-70s, whenever I convinced my father to get a PC. And I think I said earlier it was a Sol 20 from Processor Technology based on the 8080 chip. And I convinced him that I could write programs for amortization schedules and business analysis and all this kind of thing. And it was before the spreadsheet had come out, so it actually had to be completely written. It was not just figuring out what had to go in the cells and doing that. And I knew it was really just out of his love for me and the idea of helping me pursue my passion that he really bought it. But once he did get it, I did write the programs, and almost on a nightly basis, I was cranking out different amortization schedules and analysis of different properties that he was looking at. And the family business is real estate, so that's where that all came from. And I still have my original machine, and from that point, we actually built a building for a company locally called Chromatics, which made a color computer. Probably the first color computer was made in Norcross, predating Apple II and some of the other color ones. And it was called the IntelliColor, later to become CompuColor, and then Chromatics as a spinoff. And my family built a building for chromatics, and as part of the deal, in '79, ended up getting a chromatics machine as well, which was a really high-end Z80 based machine with a lot of color graphics and things like that. So I was very lucky as a child to come across these machines, and then as people were upgrading, and they didn't upgrade as quickly back then as they do now. Now it's like a car model where every year you got to get a new one. You got to have the latest iPhone or Mac. And back then, you'd keep a computer for a much longer time period. But as people were casting these off, I would take them. I mean, they were worth nothing at that point, and just kind of without really trying, ended up with a collection. And then about 15 or 20 years ago, started really actively ramping that up and trying to collect more, acquire more, everything from garage sales, got into eBay pretty strong, and then ultimately we're meeting some of the folks that made a difference in the industry. Had a chance to meet Waz out in California, and had a very nice lunch with him, and the contacts just kept building and building and building, and a lot of these folks, most of them are still alive. So I just look at it as it's almost a race, that now is the time to collect the material and to get the stories from people other than just Jobs and Bill Gates, which are typically the only folks in the industry that the general public really knows anything about. They don't really know the players behind the scenes and the ones who have made everything happen. So I'm kind of taking that as a task to try to document as much as I can, as quickly as I can, and collecting the machines is just part of that story. So ultimately, we want to have the East Coast version of a computer and technology museum that will go on hopefully long past my lifetime, and become something that people can get inspired from, and ultimately be an archive of materials for future researchers to come in and look at. We've made great connections with museums, the Computer History Museum out west. We have a great relationship with them. With the Smithsonian, we worked with them. If you get Smithsonian Magazine, this last issue, you'll see the Apple I. That was one that I did a discounted sale to them on, and got it running, and was there during that photographic session that you'll see with the characters on the screen if you see that magazine. So hopefully that answered the question. We're now in what we call the Timeline Lounge, where we've put a large timeline history from the Apple I up until 2012. Need to get a couple of the newer products, the Mac Pro and the watch and some of those things on the timeline. But this gives just a sampling of some of what we felt were the more iconic or important products at different stages of the company's history. We're also showing a history of the portables, starting in '89 with the first one, the Mac Portable. And we also have a kind of a scrambled Tetris-style history of packaging, from very, very simple boxes to the very elegant box designs and packaging that they have today. So we are always, even though the collection's large, we find that there's always new things. It's the classic garage find if you're a car collector. There's always new things to be discovered and found. There's always new stories, even as far as the users are concerned. How did people use these machines in the early days? So we're very interested in in outreach and in anything that anyone has. I'm finding that there's a lot of folks now that have large collections, if you will, in their basement or garage that, that are ultimately just going to go into a landfill somewhere, or even worse, to a recycle center and be ground up. At least in a landfill, somebody in 200 years might be archiving or doing archaeological studies in a landfill and find it. And once it gets ground up, it's gone forever. Please contact me if you have any ideas or stories, and feel free to email me, and we'll try to get back to you with any answers, or it'd be nice to have a ongoing conversation with the whole club there.
Yeah, let me say a few words, okay, to Lonnie. I want to cover a couple things for the meeting. Lonnie, thanks a million.
Yeah.
It was a great meeting. And can everybody give a... Yeah, it was really great, and we'll be back in touch. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody enjoy that?
Yes. One thing I thought might be interesting, could we just go around the room and ask what was the first, which was your first apple? Just name the model. And that. I'd be interested to know where everybody here jumped in, especially the 97-year-old. I want to know if she got one before I did.
Have you got the room in your basement with all the computers you've had over the years, Ruth?
I've moved too much.
Oh, with a guy like this, if anybody does...
What was your first model?
What was your first model, Ruth?
The Apple IIe.
I had an Apple II Plus.
Apple II Plus? Anybody else?
Apple II.
IIe.
Oh, my first one was a slide rule.
Oh.
Yes.
I have one of the original 1984 Macs. I mean, I did have it. I moved on, of course. But at that point, the manual that came with that one was only 1/4 of an inch thick. It's so amazing to me now.
Yeah, the world has changed.
Yes, manuals are a lot smaller now.
Gary?
Well, the first Apple, I was very fortunate. My job was to go to places like Xerox Park, Palo Alto Research Center. And so I saw the Alto that Xerox had a couple years before Jobs was there. And we were trying to get Xerox to make it into a commercial product so we could bring it into General Electric as a workstation. And Xerox absolutely was, the only thing they knew how to do was to build copy machines.
Yeah.
And they would not market that product. I went down to Dartmouth, which is in Washington, D.C., and they had about 15 Altos with an Ethernet to connect it, and knew that that was what we wanted. Xerox wouldn't do it. So we were talking to Hitachi, which was a computer company, and we were describing what we had seen about the computer on desktop, and they said, we can do that. And they came in about 6 weeks later with a computer, and it looked like a card table was on the screen. So that was, they didn't understand. They hadn't seen it. Apple brought one of the leases to my group for us to evaluate. And my secretary was using it for a typing station, because word processing was one of the things you could do. And it was $10,000, $12,000. It was very expensive. We knew it wasn't going to be up. So we returned it to Apple, and she had a nervous breakdown. Not really, but you know, it was horribly depressing because what it could do compared to what she was working on, which was the weighing word processing system. But my group was responsible for, it was called the Special Purpose Computer System. And we just specialized in computers that were not being used for finance. They were used for controlling the manufacturing process, for controlling sewer plants, the water distribution, anything like that. And after Scully was there, and after Scully had left, they were going broke, as everybody knows. And Scully came to GE and said, "Would you like to buy us?" And my organization said no. Well, I mean, after jobs left, it was terrible. I mean, I had the products that came out of there. I mean, they licensed their software. There were people producing clones of Apple because Apple was giving away they would license the operating system. The hardware was crappy. And IBM had come out with a PC and was running shot through the business community. So when I retired in 95, but before that we had standardized on Macintosh at corporate headquarters. And we probably had 800 Macs tied together with 5 different Ethernet networks on 7 different buildings, using microwave repeaters to tie the remote buildings together. So I've been with this shop for quite a while.
I thought that he sort of brushed over the Macintosh a lot. I know it used heavily in the printing and typesetting and that kind of stuff, graphics.
Oh, Adobe partnership with Apple is what made Apple. The ability to do the graphics.
George?
One second. Jim?
My first computer was the Apple IIe, but my first connection was in 1977. I put a requisition. I was teaching high school math at the time, and we had terminals connected to a mainframe at Johnson Wax in Racine, Wisconsin. But I put to the board a purchase request for an Apple II, an original Apple II, with a Panasonic cassette recorder and an RCA television set that I think was 12 inches at the time. The machine had 16K of memory, and the whole package was $2,500.
Wow.
Ruth?
Well, after the slide rule, there were mechanical calculators, Marchand and Friedman's.
Yes.
Have any of you ever worked with
Yes.
those? And then came the electronics.
Yes.
I had an original Bonnie Blue iMac.
The heck is that?
Yeah.
We had one, Bonnie Blue.
Yes.
Bondi, like
B-O-N-D-I.
turquoise.
Oh, wow.
Yes, sir.
That kind of brought back memories. I think I had my first, I think it was a 2E also, in the 82, I believe it was. And I was an active member of the Apple Computer Users Club back then in Columbia, South Carolina. So
That was back when we did a lot of firing.
that's true. That was the big exercise.
Do I see a couple more arms? Yeah.
Yeah, in the program, IBM was involved in computers too, and he didn't mention anything about IBM because I know I worked in a drugstore and that was our first computer. But it was big, it had big disks and everything, but it was an IBM.
Yeah. I think he really concentrated for this group on Apple. It seems, based on what he said, he's got another museum for a PC.
Texas Instrument had a real small logo.
Yeah, Texas Instrument had too.
Yes.
In the early 80s, I was at the University of Tennessee, and
we struggled to get good secretaries. Unfortunately, salary they would pay them wouldn't command the type of help that we could have. So I got a hold of a 2E, and you mentioned AppleWorks. By the time I gave anything to be typed to a secretary and got it back to proofread it, then go back and forth 3 or 4 times, with AppleWorks I could do it myself, and I would be much better ahead of the game. And about that time, or soon after, fax machines came out. They were a godsend for those that wrote proposals and had to get them to NS, National Science Foundation or something. I was doing quite a bit of work for Oak Ridge National Labs at the time, but just having the 2E and fax machines made my life a world easier than it did before that. But the 2E was really the first machine that I could really interact with better. The 2 was limited. I think we had 64K, something like that on some of the first ones.
Yes.
When my ex and I first came to visit my brother here in Naples for vacation, 1981, I liked the beach. He was a computer person, so he went out and bought an Apple II. And he spent all his time in my brother's kitchen working on the Apple II. And when I became a technology...
So was that the cause of the divorce?
Well, he was a PC guy ultimately, yeah, so after 25 years. But, yeah, never the twain shall meet, philosophically. It wasn't a rational thing. But anyway, and then when I became the technology coordinator in Walpole in 1985, and we had a capital budget to buy Apple IIs. At that point, they were using the TI-99 4As, and the teachers hated those because all they could do was program and logo or BASIC, and that was not exciting. So we did equip our 2 middle school labs with Apple IIs, but at that point, they were transitioning from 40-column to 80-column monitors or something like that, and we ended up getting the 40-column, but we talked to Apple into doing something to convert it to 80 columns without extra charge. And I've got a Mac, one of the first Macs in my attic, because my ex was involved in learning all about the newest stuff, and so it's sitting in my attic. It didn't have a hard drive or anything like that. But I didn't sell that. I gave my Apple II to the Beckett Arts Center for a yard sale. Now I'm wishing I had it.
Okay, anything else? Yes.
My first one was after I divorced and I was poor and didn't have any money. I had a refurbished Performa. And the thing about it that it did was it had in the back where you could plug in your cable TV. And you could watch TV in one window and work in another. It was different.
Okay, yes.
My first computer was the iMac, the first one that came out. And the reason I got it, my son said it was grandmother friendly.